Back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 8th, 2025. Happy Friday. Today we are going to be taking a look at the race for Congress and the generic ballot across the country as it has changed over the course of the months of the presidency of Donald Trump's second administration. We have seen that the numbers in terms of how voters perceive Democrats, perceive Republicans, and have engaged with a potential 2026 midterm ballot, the numbers have increasingly gotten better for the Democratic Party as this administration has continued to do the executive actions and the moves with the United States Supreme Court and Republicans in Congress, as we find that voters across this nation are more unhappy than happy with the president. They don't like the decisions that are coming out of the Oval Office, and Democrats are being rewarded in a generic ballot lead as the months continue based on that. Now, looking at the numbers, right now, Democrats on average hold about a 2.5 point lead in the generic ballot here, according to G. Elliott Morris. He was the previous head of 538, now has his own website. Certainly worth checking out. 2026 on Real Clear Politics, Democrats hold about a 3.5 point average. But the big impetus for why I think that, I wanted to do this video in the first place was from what I saw from CNBC, which was a polling that they had released across the country that showed that based off their data in April, Democrats maintained a 2-point advantage. Today, that advantage has extended to about 5 points. And the reason why this is noteworthy is because this group was done by Public Opinion Strategies and Hart Research, both of them on opposite sides of the aisle, and work together to have some high-quality polling numbers for both parties to look at to say that, yes, two firms from opposing ends work together to ensure that this came from a more middle-of-the-road, more standardized practice rather than a Democratic internal or a Republican internal that you can't really trust or buy into to the degree that you could for this survey. And they're finding that voters just simply aren't that thrilled with the Republican Party and arguably to the Democratic Party, but are still willing to vote for Democrats. This survey was actually utilized by a lot of right-wing talking heads about how voters weren't happy with the Democratic Party. And to that point, yes, that is correct. Now, voters, in terms of how they engage with Donald Trump's presidency, about 5 points more voters here say that they disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing compared to approve, which is actually a change from what we see on the national top line of an average here of about -8, -9, in some cases, -10 points for the president. So voters here are, in some capacities, more happy with Donald Trump's presidency than some others, but still not happy on the overall net. In terms of his approval rating on the economy, it gets worse. But again here, getting back to the point, what we're talking about is just simply how do voters engage with both political parties and who are they more likely to vote for in the 2026 cycle. So when you take a look at the ratings on the Democratic Party, they're honestly at a record low right now. The very positive number is just 6%, and the somewhat positive is about 16%. That means combined, you're working with 22% of these voters saying that they have a very positive or somewhat positive view of the Democratic Party. About a fourth of the voters are neutral, but an overwhelming amount, 33%, see it very negatively, 22% see it somewhat negatively, and a lot of that comes from members of the Democratic Party that are disaffected with the state of their party. Even under Biden in 2024, the numbers here were better. Under Harris, right before the election, much better compared to now. The numbers have gotten worse, and they really haven't seen low points like this. The last time a single-digit, very positive number came from 2015, but before then you have to go all the way back to December of 2010, and if you remember what that resulted in, that was the year that Republicans picked up 63 seats in the House of Representatives. So you might be thinking, well, if voters are as upset with the Democratic Party as they were in 10 when Republicans had a blowout, in 15 which would foreshadow the inevitable loss of Hillary Clinton, what's to say that the numbers now translate to a Democratic Party victory? Well, that's again, like I said, because a lot of voters that disapprove of the Democratic Party are Democrats. A lot of people who look at this and say, I'm not thrilled with the current state of the Democratic Party, are members of the Democratic Party who say that they want to see Democrats do more. That this time around, they're not letting these Democrats not put up any fights against the second Trump administration. The Republican Party holds a more positive view from voters across the country, but largely because their base is still intact. They just want a trifecta, and there's no real reason as to why these Republicans should not be intact in terms of how they view their party. That's just simple party politics. But looking at it from the Democratic perspective, the talking point that the conservatives have really run away with is that Democrats are unpopular, but when they take a look at the same exact survey where voters are asked, how would you vote in an inevitable 2026 midterm election, they back the Democratic Party. And taking a look, too, this is really interesting. If you take a look at, the 2024 election, their recalled vote here is nearly identical to what the national popular vote was, 44 to 43, and a lot of voters did not vote in the last election. So to find that this data point now is showing Democrats in a position where in a hypothetical matchup in 2026, they are doing well, certainly tells you everything that you need to know and explains exactly how the data has gotten worse for Donald Trump, how the engagement between the way Republicans were viewed in March and viewed in April when they had a 1-point loss in March, a 2-point loss in April that is now expanded to a 5-point loss. I mean, this is where we're at. This is really the crux of it, that voters, despite approving of Trump more than the national average, despite liking Democrats less than Republicans, still are more inclined to vote for the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. And that is the major takeaway. And it is pretty consistent, too. I mean, when you take a look at the data, a lot of these other polls that are saying that Democrats are going to win this generic ballot, they ask the same line of questioning. Exactly what? How do voters approve of one political party over the other? Democrats are routinely, in every single one of these data points, the Wall Street Journal, another great example, you'll find that Democrats take the overall advantage, 46 to 43, an expansion from where it was in April of 44 to 43. But when asking voters about how they view the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we can actually find that on here. They are not thrilled with the Democrats and they are not thrilled with the Republicans, but they are more happy with Republicans than Democrats. And that really is what Republicans are going to have to combat, is that based on how voters see the parties is not exactly how they're going to vote. And that is going to be a major, major problem for them. We'll find it here in the article at some point. But the point is, you can look. Democrats are not popular, and they're less popular than the Republicans, yet somehow they still maintain this lead, and that is what Republicans should be worried about. Because while I think they've been focused on, yes, that their opposition party, voters don't love them, it doesn't mean they won't vote for them. And that's actually something that Republicans should have known quite well. That Donald Trump in 2024 was not a popular figure. Kamala Harris had a higher approval rating, and so did Tim Walz, than both J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. But did that translate to an electoral victory in 2024? No, because a lot of voters can disapprove of their party and can disapprove of their candidate and yet still vote for them. When you look back at even elections like 2012, Obama's approval rating wasn't super hot in 2012, yet he won re-election. Because voters liked his governance, might not have liked him as a person or in terms of how he was handling the Oval Office, but did enjoy him being president and wanted that to maintain itself. And while I won't necessarily say that this country enjoys either party necessarily being in power, maybe they do, maybe they don't, that's not the point of this. The point that I'm making is that they prefer Democrats to Republicans every single time in a hypothetical generic ballot. So let's take a look at what that actually tells us in terms of electoral outcomes. Well, if the CNBC poll is correct, which one can contend that it's closer to the average than some other ones, but let's use this just as the point of reference because that's what made me make this video in the first place, a 5-point victory in contrast with what happened in 2024, which was about a 1.5 victory or 1.6% for the Republicans, that's about a 6.6% swing. We can actually visualize that. So we'll edit the margin here, click the Democratic number, and change it by 6.6%. So what do you see? Right here, all of a sudden the numbers go 215 for Democrats down to up to 234. 1 seat away from where it was in the 2018 midterm elections. Democrats were at 235. And that's just assuming that the CNBC poll is correct. One thing that I found to be the most fascinating part of this too is that if these trend lines continue, Democrats might actually reach their point of the 2018 generic ballot. Whereas you look at the numbers early on, Republicans actually maintained an advantage in the early days of the Trump administration. You'll find that Democrats were losing to the GOP up until about this point of mid-March when the numbers flipped over. But this generic ballot didn't look so hot for the Democratic Party. But it got better. And in contrast to 2018, when Democrats started out with the advantage from the very beginning, that's not what you were seeing in the 2026 generic ballot polling. Democrats had to claw their way back and are continuing to gain as the numbers get on. And so if Democrats do reach this point, where they reach Election Day winning by about 7.3% in the polls and 8.4% on the actual, well, a 1.6% victory for Republicans and an 8.4% eventual victory, that would be a 10-point swing. So let's do it again. Let's show you what that would look like. A 10-point swing in favor of the Democratic Party. Add it by margin. Click it here. Go ahead and click over other. You're going to find that here, a 10-point shift would give Democrats not just 215 seats, but 238 seats. 3 more seats than the 2018 midterm year. That was a very strong one for the Democratic Party. And so you would see the Democrats would actually reach their largest majority they have seen since Obama ushered in a massive majority in the 2008 House elections. That was lost 2 years later. And a lot of Republicans see this and say 238 is so outlandish. There's no way the map swings this much. Well, might I remind you that in 2024, Republicans won 220 seats, when in 2016, they won 241 seats, and then 2 years later, Democrats were winning back the House in 2018 with 235 seats. That was a 40-seat swing, at least. Now looking at it for 2024, it's easy to see the way in which Democrats could get to an electoral victory in 2026, and it wouldn't even take 2018-style numbers. Let's tone it down a bit. Let's go to what the average says. Democrats leading by 3.6%. Republicans won last time by 1.6%. Combined together, you're talking about a 5.2% shift. So let's map that. Won't obviously be as good as it was in comparison to the CNBC poll or the 10-point shift, but certainly good for Democrats. And I'll tell you this, they still get the majority. 5.2% shift. Democrats are at 230 seats. In some cases, it's marginal. Democrats go from 238 at the high end of a 10-point shift, and a 5-point shift brings them to 230. Still larger than any Republican majority we've seen since the 2016 election. So, 230 to 205 would be great for the Democratic Party, and certainly something that they would be happy with. And taking a look at the way the data has really changed over time, Republicans are losing ground and Democrats are gaining ground, even if it isn't to the standard that it was in 2018. And I've never claimed that it would be, and I don't think Democrats should claim that it is right now. But it has left room for a lot of growth, because it was these data points that in early 2025, in April, we looked at and said, let's come back to that. Because the numbers we knew would get better for Democrats rather than worse. Because Donald Trump was moving forward with unpopular decisions, writing unconstitutional executive orders, doing mass deportations to a degree that voters simply felt very soured on, even some of these more engaged Trump voters from the last cycle. While a lot of his base is still intact, don't get me wrong. I don't think that he's lost a third or a fourth or even a fifth of his base. I think it's maybe to 1 in 10 at most. To the degree that they will vote in 2026, you're not seeing it happen. A lot of voters, while they still may never vote for a Democrat, may not vote for a Republican next time. And we've seen that. It's very often these things happen in electoral politics, especially in midterm elections. And that will be the case for Donald Trump, just as it was in 2018. Because come 2 years after 2018, if we remember that map, Republicans came out in full force for Donald Trump, lost the election, but narrowed up the House quite significantly. No, there was no redistricting. No, there was no redraws. There wasn't a map change that gave Democrats less seats than Republicans. This was just the nature of the election year, one after the other to the other. 2016, 241 seats for Republicans. 2018, 200 seats for Republicans. 2020, 213. The whiplash is there. These things happen in electoral politics, and I have no doubt that it will happen again in 2026. And we are getting increasingly more and more data points that suggest that Democrats are in better positions than they were 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and that trend line might only continue. And even though a lot of voters on the left are upset with the state of their party, it does not mean they will vote for Republicans down the line. Rather, it means that they want Democrats to do something different, and chances are they are getting that right now, and it makes them more likely to vote for Democrats as the numbers are continued to be tracked. So, let's keep our eyes peeled. Let's watch these numbers as they are released by reputable pollsters, because they will tell us an interesting story and one that is worth watching ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.